Someone said it to you. Maybe not in those exact words, but you heard it. In a sigh that came half a second too fast. In a conversation cut short right when you were still in the middle of feeling something. In a look exchanged between two people who thought you weren't watching. In the phrase that arrived from different mouths across different years, "You're too sensitive, too intense, you care too much, you're a lot." Somewhere along the line, those observations stopped feeling like descriptions and started feeling like verdicts. Like the problem in every room you walked into was the amount of you that came with you. So you started managing it. Turned down the volume on the parts of yourself that had gotten that reaction. Learned to monitor how much feeling was showing, how much enthusiasm was appropriate, how much of your genuine in response to things you were allowed to express before it became uncomfortable for whoever was receiving it. You became skilled at the calibration, at reading the room and editing yourself in real time. And the world rewarded this. Call you mature. Called you easy to be around. And you nodded, and somewhere underneath the nodding something very quiet asked, "What about the version of me that was just being itself? What was wrong with that one?" Here is what I want to tell you before anything else. Nothing was wrong with that one. What was called too much was never a measurement of you. It was a measurement of the container. And those are not the same thing. Let's look at what actually happens in the development of a person who is consistently told they are too much. Psychologist Marsha Linehan, whose work on emotional dysregulation became the foundation of dialectical behavior therapy, identified a concept she called the invalidating environment. It doesn't require malice or cruelty. It simply describes an environment where a person's emotional responses are consistently communicated to be wrong. Too big, too small, excessive, dramatic, or simply inconvenient. The message, delivered in hundreds of small interactions, is this: what you feel is not an accurate response to reality. Your emotional experience requires correction. Linehan's research showed this produces predictable consequences. First, the person loses trust in their own emotional experience as valid information. They stop using feelings as data and start using external reactions as the measure of whether their feelings are real. Second, they develop a chronic gap between what they feel internally and what they allow to be expressed, producing an ongoing background of exhaustion and inauthenticity. Third, they internalize the invalidation. They stop needing someone else to tell them they are too much. They tell themselves. The external voice becomes internal, and the internal voice is far harder to escape. The people most commonly told they are too much are not people whose emotional responses are disproportionate to reality. They are, in most documented cases, people with what researchers call high emotional sensitivity, a characteristic with clear neurological roots that is not, in itself, pathological. Psychologist Elaine Aron at the State University of New York identified a trait she called sensory processing, sensitivity, present in roughly 15 to 20% of the population. People high in this trait don't feel more than others feel. They process what they feel more thoroughly at a higher resolution. The experience of emotion is not louder, it is more detailed. In supportive environments, this trait consistently correlates with creativity, strong empathy, deeper relationships, and high performance in roles requiring attention to nuance. In unsupportive environments, the same trait produces the predictable consequences of having a high-resolution emotional system that a low-resolution environment consistently communicated was broken. Not because the trait changed, because the feedback became the primary data the person used to understand themselves. This is where the damage lives. not in the feeling too much, in the conclusion drawn from other people's discomfort with the feeling. The conclusion now embedded enough to feel like fact rather than interpretation. I am too much. Not, I was more than that environment could hold. Not, I encountered people whose own emotional capacity couldn't meet what my intensity required. But I am the problem. I am the excess. I am the one who needs to be smaller. Psychologist Sue Johnson's research on attachment adds a crucial layer. Johnson's work showed that emotional intensity in relationships, which looks like neediness or overreactivity from the outside, is in most cases the expression of an attachment system that has learned connection is uncertain. When the people whose responsiveness you depended on communicated, through their discomfort with your emotional expression, that your authenticity threatened the connection, your attachment system received a frightening message: being yourself costs you love. An attachment system that receives that message doesn't respond by becoming calmer. It becomes more vigilant, more urgently attuned to the emotional states of others, more intense when connection feels threatened. The intensity is not the original problem. It is the escalation of an attachment system trying to maintain connection in an environment that communicated connection was in danger whenever the real you appeared. You become, over time, a person who brings a fraction of yourself to most of the places you go. You develop radar for the moment when the other person's capacity is approaching its limit, and you pull back before you reach it. You give people the curated version. This protects you from the specific pain of being called excessive again. But it produces a different pain, the pain of never being fully met, of having relationships where the other person is connected to the performance rather than the person, of spending your life in rooms where part of you waits outside. There is a particular loneliness in this, not ordinary loneliness, the loneliness of someone surrounded by connection and still isolated at the center of it. Because what is connected to is not the whole thing. Some part of you, the part that got the message earliest, wonders if the whole version is actually lovable, wonders if anyone would stay if they saw the full intensity, wonders if too much is what you fundamentally are rather than what you were told you were by people with a limited capacity for holding it. Here is the answer. It is not what you fundamentally are. It is what you were told by containers that were too small. And a container's smallness is not a measurement of the thing it could not hold. It is a measurement of itself. So what does moving through this actually look like? The first is to separate the message from the source. Every time you tell yourself you are too much, ask, who said this first? In what context? What were their own emotional capacities? Their own limitations? This is not about blame. It is about accuracy. The verdict of too much arrived from specific people in specific circumstances with specific limitations. It is not a universal finding. It is a local one. And treating it as universal is the error that has been running the longest. The second is to actively seek environments and people sized correctly for the full version of you. Not people who will simply tolerate your intensity, people for whom your depth is not a burden, but a match. They exist. They are very often the people who have also been told they were too much, and who found their way to the same quiet wondering about whether anyone would stay. They have more to offer than careful tolerance. They have the specific warmth of recognition. The third is to practice in spaces that feel safe, not editing, not the full expression all at once, but the deliberate withholding of the edit in one moment per day, when the instinct to reduce fires and you let the unedited version exist anyway. The enthusiasm you would normally dial back. The feeling you would normally compress into something more manageable. Let it be what it is. with one person who can hold it. And notice what happens. Because what happens is very often not the rejection your system predicts. It is something else entirely. Something your system, calibrated on old data, did not have in its model for what full expression produces. You were not too much. You were accurately sized for a life that was larger than what those environments could offer you. Your depth is not an excess. It is what makes the relationships you do have so real, so lasting, so genuinely felt on both sides. It is what makes you someone worth knowing fully rather than someone comfortable to know partially. The whole version is not too much. It is exactly enough. It has always been exactly enough. It simply needed a room that was built for it. Tell me in the comments, what is the part of you that you edit most automatically? The enthusiasm, the emotion, the opinion, the need? Because what you edit most is what was called too much earliest. And that is exactly what deserves to come home. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time.